You could go to other countries, and what you view as a social norm is not at all a social norm. So this is a very important piece to realize, that there is a majority society that has decided what this range of normal social function is.
Ever wondered why it sometimes feels like neurodivergent and neuronormative folks are speaking different languages? There's actually a name for that. It's called the double empathy problem. But what exactly is the double empathy problem, and how does it impact our daily lives and relationships? Tracy Turner-Bumberry, licensed professional counselor, registered play therapist, supervisor, and author, joins us to explore this crucial concept, its implications for neurodivergent support, and how it inspired her new children's book, Twig Needs Time. That's coming up on episode 237. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
We're getting ready for our annual fall event created specifically for educators who are passionate about creating neurodiversity-affirming learning environments for students. Mark your calendar for Monday, September 23rd for a live panel discussion with experts on how to support neurodivergent students in the learning environment. The panel includes Amanda Morin, a special education advocate and author, Brandon Jernix, a school counselor committed to creating neurodiversity-affirming schools, and Dr. Matt Zakreski, a psychologist who specializes in supporting neurodivergent young people. And of course, I'll be there hosting the event and adding my 2 cents as well. This event is totally free and is created so you can head back to your school the very next day and start taking steps to support the neurodivergent students who are there. Go to neurodiversity.university to register or click the link in the show notes. Tracy Turner-Bumberry is with me next.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
The neurodiversity movement. We have a lot of adults who tell you, and these are my heroes. These are the people that I take my information from. Those individuals who went through their programs and are coming out and talking about it and have the courage to do that and say, this was wrong. This is not okay. And those individuals, those children, those teenagers and adults, they have brilliant contributions to make. And it breaks my heart when we give children the message early on, because I'm an early intervention specialist, that somehow they need to change the way they're acting.
Yeah.
That's a problem to me. That's a problem.
That's episode 180. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Tracy Turner-Bumberry is with me today. Tracy is a licensed professional counselor, registered play therapist supervisor, and author of several books, including the OTT Play Therapy Groups for Clinicians and Twig Needs Time, a picture book for children. So Tracy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I always like to give a little context to our listeners about our guests. And so you and I actually met when I had recently graduated with my master's in counseling and was looking for a clinical supervisor to supervise me for my first few years as a counselor toward earning my license. So we basically met every week for a couple of years to talk about clients and how to support them. But it was so long ago. And I think that our practices have just evolved so much, especially surrounding how we see and work with neurodivergent clients. So I would love to hear from your perspective how the way that you view and understand neurodiversity has shifted over time and why you were drawn to supporting neurodivergent people.
Oh, excellent questions. Yes, Emily and I have known each other for a long time. It was incredibly easy being her supervisor.
I don't know about that, but okay.
Because she has always been just amazing and professional, and I really enjoyed that time. But to your question, I think we have so much more information than we did. And for me, I give all props to adult neurodivergents who have had the courage and strength to organize and to let us know what their experiences were like and how they needed to be treated and how they want future neurodivergents to be treated. So from my perspective, I give all props to them, because moving around the world the way I do, I now know that I am neurodivergent as well. But just because I am, it doesn't mean that I move around the world the same way other neurodivergents do. And I've been able to learn so much of therapy. Could have been a lot better in terms of treatment plan goals, expectations, therapists deciding what needed to be worked on, using social skills, reducing stimming. I mean, I really could go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
However, I feel that all of us in this field have a lot of internalized work to do to be the best therapists we can be, while also trying not to get into that shame cycle, realizing we know more now so we can do better, rather than focus extensively on what we didn't do quite so well in the past.
Yeah, I like that. Because there is this part of, I think it's just part of being human. It's really hard to admit that maybe you did something wrong, even if it wasn't intentional, or maybe if it wasn't wrong, but you could have done it better, especially when it's something that comes along with a professional identity, especially when there are people who are saying, I was harmed by these practices. It takes a lot of self-reflection and an ability to kind of accept that vulnerability in order to move through that and move past it. So it makes sense that for some clinicians, that just might be a hard place to be. I mean, educators, whatever professional it might be.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of courage. And the vast majority of therapists I've met, and I've met quite a few throughout the years, we are very passionate about the work we do. And we put a lot of value on the fact that we are helping others. And then to sit and reflect on the idea that we may have unintentionally possibly harmed in a way. Let's just be real. We may have possibly harmed by ideas we had, treatment plan goals we had. I think that is incredibly difficult to sit with. And I think it requires a lot of courage. But the other thing I want to say is, so far, up until this point, I keep saying we may have, and I think it's so important to remember present tense. We must continue to check ourselves and continue to have the relationship with our clients to where we want them to call us out. It's not all on them. We have to do the research. We have to listen. We have to be open. We have to learn about affirming practices, but also prepare to mess up because we will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other factor that influences this is that when you're in a helping profession, to realize that maybe you didn't help someone as much as you had hoped.
Absolutely.
Or that later on down the line, they had other realizations. It's just a process. It's just a process and an evolution. I remember when you and I went down and attended that Ought Play therapy training, which was through Robert Jason Grant, who's been a guest on the podcast, and he, kind of developed this, and you work very closely with him now. But the understanding of who neurodivergent people are and what they need has changed so much
dramatically
in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's just night and day. And
continues to change.
Absolutely. It's exciting to be on the forefront of that. And it's exciting to know that we are making things better. And I think that's maybe the point, is like we can look back on those things and go, gosh, I wish I had done those things better. But also then that spurs us forward.
It is. It's very much of a balancing act, isn't it? It's admitting we could have done better while also showing humility towards yourself that you didn't know. So you're using a more knowledgeable, present brain.
Right.
We want to be aware that we're learning, but not to be too difficult on ourselves and not to judge ourselves too harshly.
So one of the things that I've really seen change a lot is the way that we understand and conceptualize quote unquote social skills in neurodivergent kids. So you and I were both school counselors and frequently worked with small groups of students. But I think as our understanding of neurodivergent people has broadened, this idea of these social skills has also shifted. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit about how our conceptualization there has changed and why it's such an important distinction to make.
Well, for one, I love that you bring that up, that we both were in a school counselor role, because for anyone who has not been in a school counselor role who is listening, we want to be able to reach 100% of our children, but there are quite a few of them. We could have up to 500 on our caseload, which if you're a private practice therapist, that's not even sustainable. So it's important to bring that part up. So what we had found as school counselors is the best way to reach all of our clients is through classroom guidance lessons and group lessons. So group is a pretty common thing with school counselors. Imagine being in a school and you could guess that one of the big items that teachers wanted us to work on would be what we would now call social skills. Someone's running around the room, they're flapping their hands, they're interrupting, they're not listening. So I think any of us who were school counselors 50 to 10 years ago did a lot of what we called then social skills groups. And this is again why I'm so appreciative of neurodivergent adults who have really had us question ourselves. Is a lot of what we were teaching was absolutely the majority society opinion of what is right. And not to get too off track, but for any of us that are doing this inner work, it's very important to know that our majority society virtually decides what a social normative is. Because you could go to other countries, anyone who has knows, you could go to another country and what you view as a social norm is not at all a social norm. So this is a very important piece to realize, that there is a majority society that has decided what this range of normal social function is. So that trickles down to whereas we as school counselors were working on things that, to be completely straight with you all, promoted masking. So for anyone who doesn't know what masking is, it's when predominantly neurodivergence, but people of color have expressed this as well. Masking is when, in order to be successful in a certain environment, you have to completely mask and behave in a way that will be acceptable. And as you can imagine, that's exhausting and can also be harmful if you are not getting to be who you truly are. So social skills was very much follow A, B, C, D, E. And there really was a rubric of sorts. I'm sure you remember this too, Emily. There were literally books out that were rubrics on, in order to listen, you must keep your bottom in the seat, keep your hands in your lap, look at the teacher when she's talking. Now, what we know is there are so many different ways to navigate this world. And there are so many, you should do this, you need to do this, that aren't necessary. It's not necessary to look at a teacher in order to understand. Auditory ability has nothing to do with visual for so many people. So this is an example of how we're learning. This is all about social navigation. This is about the therapist learning about the child's world. What type of school do you go to? What is your neighborhood like? What type of friend do you want? Do you only want virtual friends, or do you possibly want a neighborhood friend? How do people interact in your world? And what are areas that you want to learn, that you want to work on, that I can help you navigate? So it's very much a off script.
Well, it's individualized.
Very much so.
And it's recognizing what somebody's specific needs and wants are. And it's not prescribed. It's not like this is what it should look like. It's what feels comfortable for you. In one of Robert Jason Grant's books, I don't remember exactly which one it was, but I pulled this quote from it, and I actually share it during some of the presentations that I do when I'm working with clinicians and educators. Our goal as clinicians is not about changing who you are, but it's about helping you get what you want and what you need. And one of the things that I think about when we talk about those social skills is the number of times that I've talked to teachers or counselors, especially in the school setting, or even parents, and they'll say things like, well, they go to lunch and all they want to do is read their book, or they go outside to recess and they sit there and they just sit by themselves and they read. Why are they doing that? And they're like, well, they need the social skills. They need to go practice being friends. I'm like, well, but if that's their lunch or if that's their recess, and that's how they recharge in order to get through the rest of the day, we should allow them that freedom. Now, and I always give the caveat, it's like, but if they're doing it because they're anxious, but they really do want those social relationships, like that's different, but we have to talk to them to figure out why.
100%. And if they're too young to really have that ability, then we need to become detectives and maybe have someone observe them and see, do they look completely content when they are reading? It's funny you bring that up because I do have a similar story that we have a new social navigation book coming out, Dr. Grant and I. And that was one of the stories I brought up. I interviewed my mom to find out more about my own neurodivergence. And she had quite a few stories that I didn't even remember. And the big story was she was getting multiple calls from school because at recess, exactly what you said, I was sitting and reading, or what they were calling like talking to myself and dancing around and not playing with anyone and laughing. So not only were they worried about my social skills, but they were worried, like, who is she talking to? And my mom says that when I came home from school, my mom asked me about it, and I told her I was making up plays in my head, which now that I look at it, wow, I was completely social navigating. I didn't need someone there. I was testing things out, I was reading because I love to read, and I was creating plays in my head that later I probably would have played with someone and seen if they wanted to do this. And my mom to this day feels guilt. But again, we know better now, because apparently she told me you can't do that anymore at recess. Mm-hmm. You have to play with your friends. I don't remember that, so I don't know how much of an effect it had on me, but I know I didn't get to do what I wanted to do in my free time. So I love that you use that as an example, because if a child looks completely happy being alone, why should they work on social navigation in that moment?
We talk about this word should a lot in clinical practice. I mean, this goes back to like some cognitive behavioral stuff, and they'll like the saying, like, don't should on yourself. Like, and so that's more of like a self-reflective should. But looking at the wider picture, why do we feel that there is something that we should or shouldn't do? And again, it comes back to those social norms that somehow we have created, these hidden rules, and then they either internalize it, like, I should be doing this because that's what people say I should be doing, or other people try to encourage them and say, oh, well, you don't want to do this, you want to fit in. But what we have learned so much is that if it's not harmful, it's at least not helpful.
Exactly. There are many paths to the goal. Mm-hmm. And I do really like that expression. So if the goal is making a friend, if a child has identified that is a goal, there are many paths that can get you to the same goal.
Anytime a clinician is working with kids, obviously, we're also working really closely with the parents. And a big part of my work always feels like, everything that we do to help parents understand their child's diagnosis and, how to support their child. I wonder what some of the biggest factors that you see that are impacting parents of neurodivergent kids, and how do you help to support the parents?
I think number one, it's exhaustion. I think all parents are exhausted. I think neurodivergent parents are especially exhausted. I think they get a lot of mixed messages on what they should and should not be doing amongst family members, school personnel, professionals. You and I are having this conversation. There could be two therapists having a different podcast. where it would be completely behaviorally based. In this moment, in 2024, this could still be happening. So there are so many mixed messages that parents get. So there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of looking at how they were raised. We all do that, though. How we were raised, how we made friends, so therefore they should do it this way. A lot of overwhelmed. I don't mean to generalize, but I will say in general, I think schools can be extremely difficult for our neurodivergent children. So parents are getting constant phone calls, and I think it's overwhelming. So I have so much empathy. I think I spend a lot of time with my parents. Part of my therapy protocol is every 4th session is a parent session. But with some of my parents, I do even more. I do a session with the child and then a parent session the next session. And I really do make sure it is focused on the child, because I do think it can be very helpful for parents to have their own therapist because of how much stress there is. But I think it's so important to be allies and advocates. We hear so often in the LGBTQIA population and in the people of color population how important it is to have allies and advocates. And I feel like it's so similar with neurodivergent parents and children. I try so hard to be an advocate and an ally, to show up to IEP meetings when they work in my schedule, or 504s, to invite grandparents to come in and have conversations so I can talk to grandparents about why we're not forcing the child to do this or that, to reach out to other agencies and see if there's a better way of doing things. So I do think advocacy and being an ally to the parent is super important.
And the other problem is the status quo for treatment or suggestions from the primary people that are often giving it, from your pediatrician. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but pediatricians are not very neurodiversity affirming. If you have a psychiatrist or, someone else in the health profession, a lot of the ideas that they have about supporting kids often are outdated, but they're not working with those kids in the same way that we are, where we're seeing that these things need to be done differently. And so information that parents get is not always steering them in the right direction. So if they don't have somebody who's kind of offering those things, then they don't always see that they're out there.
The interesting thing about our profession is that we are seeing clients. So let's use autism for an example. They were given that diagnosis from a medical model of disability that is filled with ableist statements. So in order to get the diagnosis, you have to go through the medical model of disability, which is filled with ableist statements. And then you have all of this documentation after the assessments have been completed that is also filled with ableist language. And so we are then taking all of this information and then trying to mold it into neurodiversity affirming. I feel that's where our real challenge lies. I'm laughing because it's funny, not in a funny way, but in a, well, wow, no wonder why I'm so tired. I'm suggesting people go get diagnoses because it can help them with advocacy, while knowing that the steps it takes to get that diagnosis is going to be very medical model disability affirming information.
Absolutely. I want to talk for a minute about the double empathy problem.
Sure.
So this is a concept that was first described by Dr. Damian Milton in 2012. And so the double empathy problem is the idea that communication issues, specifically in his original work between autistic and non-autistic people, happen because both groups have different ways of understanding and interacting in the world. And it's not just that neurodivergent people struggle to understand others, but it's that both sides can find it hard to understand each other. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit and tell me what some of the ways are that you see the double empathy problem showing up in the world.
I feel you described it so well. I would add to it that not only do we now know both sides are having difficulty with empathy because there is a disconnect between how both are experiencing the world. But many of us in the helping profession put all the responsibility on the neurodivergent client to develop empathy. So if you show eye contact, if you repeat back what someone's saying to you, if you wait 2 seconds to talk back to someone after they're finished speaking, if you discuss things that you're not really interested in, this was a big one. Rather than continue to talk about vacuum cleaners, which you're very interested in, you need to talk more about what this person is interested in.
Right.
The opposite was never said to the neuronormative client. It was never said, you do need to ask about vacuum cleaners sometime because Johnny's really interested in that. But oh, wow, was the opposite true? So the onus of responsibility was all on the neurodivergent and how they needed to change in order to have a relationship. And so now we're spending a lot of time and focus on, in order to have a relationship where there might be two very different people, empathy is developed by both people working on it. How can both people modify and navigate this relationship in a way to where both people feel seen and heard and understood?
It's such an important way to conceptualize the work that we're doing, because it really does value the fact that we want to depathologize. Like, just because this is the way that you interact in the world doesn't mean that it is inherently wrong, but it just needs to be both ways. It's a two-way street.
Exactly.
So that was part of the inspiration for your new book, Twig Needs Time. So I just love this story, and I would love for you to tell everyone the story about how you created the story and why you felt like it was so important to tell.
I feel like the story it literally came to me. So I have a huge love of all animals. And one of my pet dogs is a certified animal-assisted play therapy dog. So she comes into my office. However, when she's at home, she is very hyper, very happy, very inquisitive. If I want to play ball, I need to play ball right now. Very happy dog. And we moved, and within about a month of moving in 2020, we discovered a very skinny, timid gray cat on our property. And we began feeding him, but he was terrified of us. We knew that he was interested in us because he kept coming back to the food. He would watch us from a distance. He was interested, but he was also terrified of us. So we literally spent 4 years with zero expectations. We fed him every day. I talked to him. I sang to him. I am probably that wacky neighbor. There were times where I would lay down on the lawn because I read that if you're really low, they won't be as afraid of you. After 4 years, he is now a completely friendly cat to us. He runs to us. He follows us. He allows us to pet him. He is completely changed when it comes to our relationship with us because we gave him time and we didn't force it. I had heard people that were like, oh, just pick him up. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. And then one day while I was petting him, I thought, oh my gosh, these two are such a perfect example of double empathy. Carly's constantly looking for a friend. Twig was looking for a friend, but their way of going about it was so different. Whereas in the past, it may have been just find a different type of friend. You two are too different. How can I show in this children's book? Because I still wanted to keep it fun, rhymey, silly. I didn't want it to be, hello, children, this is a book on double empathy. I feel like there's just been too much of that. How can I show this in pictures and poetry? How two very different beings can use double empathy to become friends. So in this book, Twig Needs Time, It's all about the steps that Carly is taking to give Twig the time and space and quiet and care that he needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a second book in the works called Carly Needs Now, and it will mirror this book, but it will be more about what Twig can do to help Carly feel that she's being loved and cared for and her needs are being met. So that's how that came about.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I think truly, like, if you are a parent, an educator, a school counselor, a clinic, anyone, it's just a great resource and a great conversation starter for kids. And so as we kind of wrap up our conversation, if you were talking to a neurodivergent child, they've just been diagnosed, they're trying to figure out what this means, they're maybe struggling with a variety of things, whether that's school-related, academics, peers, but what's the first thing that could help them going forward?
To make sure that they knew that I was 100% their advocate and their ally, and I want them to be their complete authentic self. The biggest thing I say to my clients, it seemed to be such a relief, is when I say to them, you are not in therapy because you're autistic. There is nothing wrong with being autistic. You are not in therapy because you have ADHD. There's nothing wrong with being ADHD. But as an ADHDer and or an autistic moving through this world, the amount of stress, masking, coping, relationship building you have to do could very well be the reason why you're in counseling, but not because of the essence of who you are. That alone can be a game changer.
Tracy Turner-Bumberry, author of Twig Needs Time. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
When we step back and examine society's expectations for neurodivergent people, we can see how sometimes the expectations don't always make sense. The reason that this is the way things have always been done doesn't hold water when we think about how individual variability influences our relationships and interactions. And finding new ways to accept and support each person's way of showing up in the world is necessary to create a community that values everyone's contributions, regardless of ability or neurotype. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Talk to the tune of a hickory stick. You were my queen in calico. I was your backward barefoot foe, and you wrote on my plate. I love you, Joe, when we were a couple of kids.
Thanks again to Tracy Turner-Bumberry. We have links to her website, social media, and her book, Twig Needs Time, in the show notes. As we send kids back to school, I want to remind you that we have lots of episodes in our catalog about school, from a teacher's, parents', and even a student's perspective. If you feel like they could be helpful, you can search them out at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Talk to the tune of a hickory stick. You were my queen in calico.
This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance,